pun and wit. Punning means a play on two meanings of the same word, and that is when we use homonyms. Words that are spelt the same, they sound the same, but they have different meanings. That is the one aspect of it. Words that are spelt the same, they sound the same, and they have different meanings. A classic example of punning, it comes from Romeo and Juliet, where Mercutio says, when he's dying from a sword wound, he says, "Ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man." Now the pun is obviously on the word grave. He says, "Ask for me tomorrow, I'll be a grave man, I will be in my grave, and of course I'm not going to look very happy." So there's the one example of punning. The second example is where homophones are used. In other words, they sound the same, but they are spelt differently, right? So here is an example in a little joke. Here about the guy whose left side was cut off. He's all right now. Now, obviously, the pun here is on all right. All right, meaning having all right side. In other words, he has only one side, and that's the right side. And he is also all right. He seems to be okay after having been chopped in half. All right? Now, let us see if you can find the homonym in the pun. Homonyms are very often used in puns. Why did the teacher wear sunglasses? Because his students were so bright. The word, of course, is bright, and the play is on the word bright. Now, these are quite lame examples, but those are the types of little jokes that you'll find in a typical Christmas cracker, and I suppose they have a place in the sun. So let us have a look at it. They make use of punning nevertheless. Why do cows have bells? Because their horns don't work. So we look at the literal bells that they have around their necks, and also they act like horns, right? They make a noise in order to warn people. Why can't a car play football? Because it only has one boot, right? So the pun there is on boot. It has only one boot. A car has a boot. And of course, a football player will have two boots. A prisoner's favorite punctuation mark is the period. That is, of course, the full stop. It marks the end of his sentence. Now, a period does mark the end of a grammatical sentence, but it also plays on the other meaning of the word, and it is, of course, a prison sentence. How long are you supposed to stay in jail? Now let's see if you can find the homophone in the joke. A pessimist's blood type is B negative. Now you know that B negative is a blood type, but if you pronounce it, something that will sound the same is B negative. In other words, he is negative. He is accustomed to being negative, right? A bicycle can't stand on its own. It is too tired. So it has two tires, or it is too tired to stand on its own. What do you call a girl who stands between two goalposts? Annette. So her name is Annette, and it's also a net, right? I rather like this one. What did Bruce Willis say when he saw an asteroid heading for Earth? Armageddon out of here. Now, Armageddon, supposedly like the end of times, the end of the world, or I am getting out of here, right? Now, let's have a look at wit. Um, Wit also relies on punning to a great extent, but wit is a figure of speech on its own that is worth looking at in detail. So, historically, it is seen as a sign of cultivated intellect. The important thing here is that there is emphasis on intellect. Now, you also needed a little bit of intellect to unravel the puns that we talked about, but a lot more intellect is involved in the use of wit. It can be present, wit can be present in images, in imagery, in conceits, it's a different kind of wit. In paradoxes can be witty, in other words, very cleverly said. Any other poetic device can make use of wit. So remember, wit is actually very often part of another figure of speech, but it involves an intellectual response from the reader. Very often, a pun overlaps the wit. So you can see how the following little joke is a bit more clever than the ones that we spoke about before. My cat has just eaten a bunch of cheese. Now he's heading to the basement to look for mice. He's going to attract the mice because of the cheese that he has eaten. So it's a bit more clever to figure it out. A very well-known one comes from John Donne. When he wrote to his wife and their relationship was over, he wrote to her 3 words, and he said, John Donne, Anne Donne, undone. Whole message said with great brevity. So you'll see as we go along, there is intellect involved and there is brevity involved. It's a quick saying and it's clever. It has punch, right? Another one where it's more elaborate and we have to look for it, for instance. For I have known then already, known them all, have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. So once again, you have to use your intellect to come to the actual meaning and where the wit comes in. He has looked at the evenings, the mornings, and the afternoons when he had coffee, and he's measured out his life with coffee spoons. So a boring life, a life full of coffee and the coffee spoons, suggesting the times that he had coffee in his life that went so slowly. So witty there said in a more elaborate way. Now, we'll have a look at a few more examples of wit. Remember I told you that brevity is usually the soul of wit. It is what wit is all about. It is quick, it is clever, and very often there's a bit of humor. Sometimes humor that sort of borders on a bit of sarcasm, but humor nevertheless, but quick and clever way of speaking. So you find them in responses to somebody else's talking, in statements, something that you actually say, and it is responses to established attitudes in society. In other words, you see something happening in society and you have something quick and witty to say about it. You have an opinion and you say it in a quick, witty way. So here are a few classic examples. Mark Twain said, "Clothes make the man. Naked people have little or no influence in society." Another one, "Start every day off with a smile and get it over with." From Fields. Another one. I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it happens, says Woody Allen. You know, Woody Allen is sometimes very witty. Um, it is often in replies which are very quick and funny. There's this whole idea of repartee. It's said quick response. That is the soul of wit. It's that saying something quickly back, and it's just clever, right? The journalist says, "What do you think of Western civilization?" And Mohandas Gandhi says, "I think it might be a good idea," right? Something just came to mind now. It just happened to me yesterday. We made a joke in a restaurant and we said, "Can we have a bottle of champagne? It's my birthday." And the waiter said, "It's fine, I'll order it, but it's going to take a while for it to come." Very clever answer on the spot, and intellectually stimulating. Now, Shakespeare uses his own version of wit. Basically, it's the same thing. But Shakespeare's wit is based on lively, intelligent ideas. Once again, it's the idea of intelligence and of liveliness, quick responses. And once again, expressed in brief terms. Now, the essence of wit actually comes from something which has become an idiom, and it is from Act 2 in Hamlet, where Polonius says, "Brevity is the soul of wit." You must have heard this expression. Brevity, in other words, being short, being quick and to the point, is the soul of wit. That is what wit is all about. So being brief, in other words, is the essence, basically, of intelligence. Another quote from Shakespeare, typical Shakespearean wit, comes from The Merchant of Venice. "You speak an infinite deal of nothing." You speak an infinite deal of nothing. Now, wit and epigrams are similar. Epigrams are also witty, but there's a slight difference in the definition. Try and remember, brevity is the soul of wit, is that quick response. Now, epigrams are sharp, witty, pointed sayings. It's wit in sayings, right, that become established in society. So an example would be, "Swans sing before they die. 'Twere no bad thing should certain people die before they sing." Meaning that some people can't really sing at all. Then, of course, we have a different kind of wit. It's called metaphysical wit, used by the metaphysical poets, and it is used often in conceits, right? So it's metaphysical wit. That's where we also have this quick, witty, intelligent saying. It relies on intelligence. It is most certainly more intellectual even than the other aspects of wit. But it's used usually in persuasive arguments, right? And it is logical in nature. So you can see it's more intellectual. And those are those very elaborate comparisons that the metaphysical poets used in their poetry. Let's look at an example used by John Donne, of course, who was a metaphysical poet. He says the following, and it's from A Valediction Forbidding Mourning, and we have referred to this poem a few times, and we still will. The one example that he gives to his lover or his wife, if you like, before he leaves, because he's about to leave, and he says, "I'm saying goodbye, valediction, but you're not to mourn my leaving," right? He says, "I'll tell you why," and he gives a few examples. In this instance, the example is of gold being beaten into powder into a powdery substance. So our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion. So if I leave, there's not going to be a breach. I'm not going to leave you. The two souls that are one will just be expanding. Understand? How? He uses a conceit, a simile in a conceit. He says, like gold to airy thinness beat. We can beat gold to an airy thinness. We're going to expand two as one. So it's going to actually just make our relationship. We're going to widen our horizons. We're going to make it wider and bigger. What is he doing? He is urging his lover not to regret their temporary parting. If you were to explain this conceit, for instance, you're going to say, please don't regret forbidding mourning, right? Don't regret, please. Our temporary parting, because the parting is not forever. It's not a breach, right? Remember, you have to explain the precious metal gold that can be beaten to an infinitesimal fineness without breaking. So we can make it finer and huger, larger, but it won't break. We're still going to be intact. And the bond will remain intact, although it is stretched across the distance that separates them. That's it then for wit and puns for today.